Test, 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 test. Happy Sabbath, church. Let's try it one more time. Happy Sabbath, church. There you go. It's a lot better. I found it every time I do it, it's a lot better on the second time than the first time. I don't know why. Maybe some of you are taking a nap. No, just kidding. Oh, I'm just so happy to be in church, folks. And I'm so glad to see a lot of you today. I see a lot of guests today. May I see the hands of those of you who are visiting for the first time in our church? Please raise your right hand. Those of you who are visiting for the first time. All right. So we have our guests from our VBS, Adi and Kalea. All right. Can you please stand up? There you go. And I have a great news. These two girls are joining our Pathfinder Club beginning September. Right? So our club is growing, right? And that is the result of our VBS. Thank you. You may be seated now. And I see some of my friends, of course, last night I have introduced to you my good friend, way back in Philippines. Now they migrated here in United States. They're working as missionaries with the whole family. My good friend, Rafael Paloma, together with his wife. Please stand up so everybody can see you as well. There you go. That's them. Right. I see also Sarah Williams and her two teenagers. Can you please stand up from last year university? All right. Thank you. At the back, I see also Brother Edson together with his family. Can you please stand up, Brother Edson? I haven't met his wife personally yet. During the pandemic, we're blessed. We have been blessed by his music. I don't know if you remember it, right? I have asked, him to send me some of his recordings. He's a regular guest at LLBN TV station. He's always there, and he's part of the Binhi group. And I also see another couple. I met them at Waterman Church back then. I'm so sorry, I forgot your name. You're the classmate of my niece, Redem Ibora. All right? Right? If I'm not mistaken. So I just could not remember your name. I'm so sorry. And for those of you who are visiting, I'm so sorry I could not really remember your name, but I see some unfamiliar faces. Thank you so much for joining with us. And oh yeah, it's flashing here. And I'm so thankful for Elder Tonet because as you notice, all the participants that we have here in front, you don't see them regularly here, Normally they were just sitting there, but thanks to the effort of Elder Tonet for making sure that all those who have not given a lot of chance, to come here will be able to participate as well. Thank you so much for your ministry. I don't know. I am just so excited today. We've been gone for 2 weeks. Then after our vacation to Oregon, we had our VBS. So I miss home. I miss this church. And I'm so glad to be back together with my whole family, right? All right, so it's showing now. Still not yet? Okay. So can I have my slide projected in front? There you go. Okay. So before we start, why don't we pray one more time in order for us to seek the Lord and His presence to be in our side. Why don't we bow our heads one more time? Gracious God, please fill us, Lord, especially myself. Use me mightily as you have used me in the past, so that the message that you have for your people, I will be able to share to them, Lord. And all of us will be blessed. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Today I'll be talking about a very familiar story in the Bible. That's why I expect the kids to pay attention closely, all right? Because this is a story that is very common to all of you. And I want you to tell me if my own version of it, not my own version, but the way I related this story is the right one or no, or not the right one. All right? So kids, please listen carefully. The title of my sermon is The Exodus Journey. We are basically, I'm starting a new series of study. And the focus of my study is in the book of Exodus. And the overall title of this series is The Exodus Journey. And the title of my sermon today is Trusting His Heart. You guys ready? All right, let me ask you this question. How can we trust God when we don't understand what He is doing? It's hard, right? That's why, for new couples, for those people that, for those couples who just got married, the hardest part, which I mentioned this already before, that the hardest part was the first 2 years of their being together, right? Because that is the time that you are still adjusting. Two personalities being in the same roof, being in the same place, adjusting to each other, right? You've experienced that, Dr. Gio, right? The first 2 years is always the hardest part, right? Based on my experience. But after that, I'm not saying it's all bed of roses. There's still some, arguments. But compared to the first time, or the first 2 years, it's kind of smoother, right? Because, that is the time, the first 2 years that is the time that you are still adjusting. You're still, beginning to understand its what? Character, its personalities, right? And this experience actually is our experience as well with our experience, with our experience with God. That sometimes we don't understand Him. That's why the question is, how can you trust God when sometimes you don't understand Him? Right? How can you trust God when sometimes you don't understand Him? Because the fact of the matter is, sometimes God doesn't make sense. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. Sometimes God seems to be not making sense at all. Right? That's why you are questioning God. Lord, why is this happening to me? Why me? Lord, why? Well, there are so many whys, right? That's why, this author, a professor, from the School of Theology from Loma Linda University. He is a very known author of books, which actually one of his books we used as our textbook at La Sierra University. The title of the book is written by Sigve Tonstad. I don't know if you've heard of him. Sigve Tonstad, a very bright scholar. The title of his book that he wrote, to address this situation is God of Sense and Tradition of Nonsense. I have it at home. I was thinking of bringing it this morning, but I said, just forget it. I'll just mention the title. The God of Sense and the Tradition of Nonsense. So he was basically talking about the story of Job, right? Job, according to the story, he was a righteous man, but yet, in spite of being a righteous man, he experienced a lot of what? Bad experiences in life. That's why I came to this conclusion or to this statement that sometimes God doesn't make sense. In the story of Israel, you will find all these instances. That's why I have decided to talk about the book of Exodus, because if you're going to look at the story of the Israelites and our story, you will find a lot of similarities. That's why their journey is our journey, right? Their Exodus journey is our Exodus journey. They were headed to what? To the promised land. And you and I are headed to where? To the land that is promised to you and to me. And that is what? The new heavens and the new earth, right? So big similarities. But back then, The Israel, if I can give you examples, the Israel don't know what to eat. And God said, I will rain food from heaven. How does that make sense? Food that will come from heaven? That doesn't make sense, right? If you would come to me, Pastor, I'm hungry. All right, I'll pray for you. I'll send you the ravens to feed you. And you would tell me, Pastor is going nuts. He's going crazy already. Right? Right? That doesn't make sense. The Israel, they don't know where to drink. And God said, hit the rock and the water will come out. Those type of things, they don't make sense. Right? From the perspective of the Israel. Yes, some of us are saying that sometimes God doesn't make sense. Or our comprehension sometimes has a hard time catching up with God's ways, but yet when we're able to really understand it, we will always find rationale in everything that God is doing to you and to me. Right? Yes, I would agree with you that sometimes God's actions don't make sense. Right? Sometimes. But yet, the more you study it, the more you deal with God, the more you will realize that every action that He is doing makes sense. That's the main idea of our study. Right? That's why, just like what I said, this is just the first of the many sermons that I'll be doing, on this series. So to begin our study, let us go ahead and read our Bible in the book of Exodus chapter 1. Okay, I projected it there so that if you don't have your Bibles with you, you can just follow along. All right? Exodus chapter 1, beginning in verse 5 through 7. It says, the total number of people born to Jacob was 70. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died. All right? And all his brothers and that whole generation. But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong so that the land was filled with them. This part of the story or the narrative of the Israelites was prior to the story of Moses, right? And based on this story, it tells us in verse 7 particularly that they were fruitful and has increased abundantly in numbers. This is the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham, right? According to Genesis chapter 12, verse 2, you will find there that God made a covenant, to His friend, to His servant Abraham. In this what He said, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. At first, it seems that God will not fulfill His covenant with Abraham because he does not have any son at all at first. But then he had a son. Then the fulfillment of this covenant is in verse 7. That, his family grew rapidly. They were fruitful and has increased abundantly in numbers. So basically this text, folks, is telling us or reminding us of God's covenant, to Abraham. Right? And it's also His way of telling you and me that He is in control, right? That He is in control. But then we go to verse 8. Verse 8 tells us that now a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. Or I highlighted the word know there. What does it mean? How do you understand the word know? And how can it be possible? Maybe some of you are asking, how can it be possible for someone, a king, who grew up in the same place where Moses was, and yet did not know Moses? Well, the word know here, it does not refer to intellectual knowledge or a possible slip of memory, right? But refers to relational knowledge and commitment. Right? So definitely, this king, this new Pharaoh after Moses, knew Moses very well. He knew Moses very well, and he knew the arrangement between the old Pharaoh and Joseph, and Joseph. Right? But yet, he doesn't want to honor that one. He doesn't want to honor that one. All right? Whatever arrangement the previous king had made with Joseph and his people, he is not willing to honor it. That's why in verse 9 and 10, it says, he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come," this is what he said, "let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." This was his worry when he saw that the people of God, Israel, is growing in numbers. That's why he came up, to address this problem, he came up with this solution, right? Actually, he has 3 plans. What are the 3 plans? The first one is in verses 13 and 14. This is the plan A that he had, okay? I hope that you're following me here. Then later on I'm going to make my point. Why I'm saying or sharing this. This is the plan. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. So what was the first plan? To address the growing number, right, of the Israelites. What was the first plan? The first plan is what? To double the labor. The word rigor was used twice in these 2 verses. All right? It means what? They made the life of the Israelites miserable, right? With the intention of what? Punishing them. Because the Pharaoh or the king was thinking that if he would punish them, maybe this would demoralize the Israelites. And hopefully, they will stop growing in numbers. Right? That was a plan A. But we all knew that it did not work. That's why the plan B kicked in. All right? Remember, there's 3 plans, right? Plan B. Verses 15 and 16. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and seat them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, what should they do? They have to what? Kill them. And if it is a girl, they have to what? They should live." All right, that's a plan B. All right, what's a plan B? Midwives, instructed them to kill all the babies. Now, I found something interesting in this verse. Do you find it interesting that the 2 lowly Hebrew midwives were named in this narrative? What were the names? Shiphrah and what? Puah, right? And how about the name of the king, the name of the Pharaoh, It was not named, right? That's very interesting. 2 lowly Hebrew midwives were named compared to a mighty Egyptian king, right? One thing I noticed, when I studied the Bible is that when a person is not named in the Bible, that person would not last long. That person does not have, most of the time, there are some instances where a nameless person were used by God, right? But most of the time, when you are not named in the scripture by God, that means God has no any purpose in your life, all right? And this is basically the reason why the king was not named, because he would not last for a long time, all right? And God would fulfill his plan and his purpose through these midwives, right? So, this is the plan B. For the midwives, they were instructed what? To kill all the male babies. And we all know the reason why it did not succeed, because these two, the midwives, were afraid of God. All right? That's why the third plan kicked in again. Because plan A failed, plan B failed. That's why the last option is plan C. And that is in verse 22. What is in verse 22? Then Pharaoh, according to verse 22, commanded all his people, every boy that is born to the Hebrews, you shall throw into the Nile. You know the story, right, kids? There was a decree by Pharaoh that all the baby boy from the Israelites, from the Hebrew community, should be what? Thrown into the Nile River. But if you're a girl, you will live also. Man, if you're a girl at the time, you're lucky, right? Good thing I was not born by then. Right? Right, Jake? Good thing you were not born by that time. Or else you would be been eaten by crocodiles already. Right? So, these are the three plans. Right? These are the three plans. That's why, by looking at this, if you're a reader of the Bible, if you're not familiar with the conclusion or the end result of the story, you would think, if you are aware of the covenant of God that He made to His people, you would probably think, how would God fulfill His covenant? How would God fulfill His purpose to His people, right? One thing I realized when I'm studying this story is that God has to deal with humans' free will and Satan's agents. You see all of these problems that God has to experience, that God has to deal with. When it comes to what? To fulfilling His purpose for your life and for my life. That's why no wonder in our life there are so many obstacles. There are so many trials, right? We experience all of that. Well, sometimes you're saying, hey, if you're a powerful God, you can stop all of this. But yet, when God created you and me, He created us with what? With free will, including these bad agents by Satan. And these are the things that is going around, controversy that is going around, right? And God has to deal with this. And most of the time, it gets in the way of God that led to the delay of His plans for us. But one thing I can assure you, my dear brothers and sisters, that whatever God has started in you, He will finish it. Yes, there might be delays, all right? But we all know, in your part, in our part, but God's timing is always what? Tell me the word. Perfect. It might be delay from you and my part. We might see it as a delay, when it comes to accomplishing His purpose for our life, but yet in God's part, it is always the right and perfect timing. What is the reason why it's happening? We don't know. And we'll find out in this story, right? Now let's move on with the narrative of the Israelites. After a few verses after this, we will find the story of Moses. Moses comes into the narrative, right? He comes in to the narratives. In verse 2, in chapter 2, the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine baby, I love this phrase, she hid him for 3 months. Now, mommies or mothers, how can this be possible? Do you think it's possible to hide your baby from your neighbors for 3 months? You think it's possible? Maybe this time, in our time, it's possible, But back then, where you can hear even the snore of your neighbor, well, it's only in cabins, in lodges, right? The youth, some of them were not able to sleep because of, The snores, I believe. That's why when I went there, I'm supposed to be in a cabin, but I decided to bring my folding bed and stay inside the cafeteria so I can do my own concert there without complaining all night long. You know, when I say concert, all right? I was there by myself, all right? I was there by myself. And the crickets and all these rats, they were cheering. Right? I don't know how possible is this, folks. Right? For you to be able to hide your baby for 3 months. But this is basically what happened. But let me tell you something that you have to really understand when it comes, to the use of the word three in the Bible. When you study the Bible and when you see the word three, when it comes to any narrative, you have to understand this. Because this can be symbolic. All right? This can be symbolic. The number three here does not mean, the exact number, but it is symbolic. What do I mean by that? Right? It could mean that it attains completion or it has reached its limit. Let me give you an example. The story of Moses. When God commissioned Moses to take Israel out of captivity, how many signs did God give Moses? In order for him to be able to convince his people that he was sent by God to deliver his people. How many signs? Tell me. 3 signs, right? What are those signs? The rod will turn into what? Serpent. What's next? The hand will become what? Leprous, right? And the third one is what? Water will turn into what? To blood. These are the 3 signs, right? And another one, the plague. It lasted for how long? Lasting for 3 days, the plague. What does it mean? Right? It reaches a limit that a person could hear. So when you say, she hid him 3 months, it could mean literally, but it could also be symbolically. It means that the mom, Jochebed, is no longer can no longer hide him, from the authorities. Because he's growing older and he's crying a lot, right? That's why according to verse 3, but when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark. Ha, I love this. She took an ark. I highlighted there, right? It reminds us of the what? The first ark in the Bible, right? Noah's ark, right? Ark of bulrushes for him, dab it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. Ark in the old times, they were made with different materials, but by looking at this narrative and the narrative of Noah, they serve the same purpose. And what is that purpose? For the salvation of man. Right? For the salvation of man. In order for God's will to be accomplished. Right? In order for God's will to be accomplished. Now my question here, let's go to the application of this story. My question I would like to throw at you is, how often do you see yourself being in the shoes of Jochebed, the mother of Moses? I mean, she did her best. She did her best in keeping and protecting the child. But when she could no longer do it, she finally said, Lord, I give up. He is yours. In reality, my dear brothers and sisters, when we experience difficulties in life, when we experience trials in life, what's the initial thing that we do? We try to do our very, very best in order for us to what? To solve that problem. But when the time that you can no longer do it anymore, You can no longer carry that load anymore. That is the only time that you would say, Lord, this is yours. I give up. By looking at it, she did a good job. She had this good intention of taking care of the child, right? But when it comes to application of it, my dear brothers and sisters, whenever you are in a situation like this, when you are facing a big problem and you're carrying it, don't carry it with you for a long time. The idea that I would like you to see and to picture is when you face something that is very difficult for you to manage and to handle, don't even, give it to the Lord right away. Give it to the Lord right away, right? Maybe you have a child that is very, very difficult to handle, to manage, or to discipline. Surrender that child to the Lord. Maybe you have a situation in life that you've been carrying for a long time. Give it to the Lord, right? Because one thing I can tell you is no matter how good you are, you're not good enough to overcome it. You have to remember that any problems that we have in this world is smaller compared to the God that we have. Our God, my God and your God is bigger into whatever problems that you and I might be facing or are facing, in this world. I remember my last sermon is about bargaining with God, right? And one of the lessons that I, mentioned is the reason why we bargain is because we want to be in control of our life. This morning we had a good discussion with our youth. That's why I didn't realize it's about time, for the second service. Because we're talking about the importance of making decisions. And when you get to a certain age, you're thinking, that you're old enough, you're big enough, you're knowledgeable enough, you have all this wisdom to make your own decision. Because the bottom line on that one is you want to be in control of your life, right? And who is not guilty of that? We are all guilty of that. None of us doesn't want to be what? In control of our life. We want to be in control of our life. We always say this, reasoning, this is my life, this is my future, this is my body, I'm in charge of this. My dear brothers and sisters, we want to be in control of our life. And the thing is, sometimes even when it comes to solving the problems or dealing with the problems in life or situations in life, we carry the same situation. We carry that same attitude, right? But one thing I can tell you is the moment that you have experienced this, whatever situation in life, give it to the Lord right away. Remember, He's inviting you to have rest in Him. How can you have rest in Him if you are carrying the load? The only time that you would have rest in Him is if you would give up that load, right? And you will have that freedom because you fully trust Him, right? So in verse 5, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her attendants walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it, right? So in verse 5, it tells us that the daughter of Pharaoh saw the baby and she decided to what? To adopt him, right? And to make the story short, his mom, or the mom, or Jochebed, the mom of Moses, became his nanny. Now, what's the lesson that we can get from this part of the story, my dear brothers and sisters? When it comes to God accomplishing His will, sometimes He does it in things that we, did not expect. Right? And this is basically the situation, right? God would use every means, in order for Him to be able to accomplish His purpose in your life. And in this case, He uses an insider, right? From Egypt, from the government, and not just a regular person, but she is the daughter of the king. That seemed impossible, right? In life, you'll get surprises from God how He will answer your prayer and how He will accomplish His purpose in your life. You know, sometimes you would find the answer from your prayer from the least person that you expect. Right? Really? That person? He was my enemy. He hated me. She hated me. Well, during the time after you prayed, God is using that person. Wow. God is using people that sometimes you don't expect, right? And even in the Bible, you will find stories, right? Where God uses a lot of things that you don't expect, right? In the past, He used animals like donkey in order for Him to accomplish His purpose in the life of Paul. Right? In the past, He used what? The ravens in order for Him to accomplish His purpose in the life of Elijah by feeding Elijah. Right? He even used His people's enemies. God would use every means to accomplish His purpose for our life. That's why when you are in a situation where it would seem impossible to get away, don't ever doubt God, my dear brothers and sisters, right? Don't ever underestimate God. And sometimes, when you're in a situation, maybe you're saying, maybe this is it, Lord. Maybe this is it, right? Have you experienced something like that? This is it. I give my life to you, Lord. But, my dear brothers and sisters, don't ever underestimate God. Because He could use anything or anybody in order for Him to answer your prayer and accomplish His will for your life. In verse 11 and 12, many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews. And he saw how hard they were forced to work. During his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. What is going on here, folks? We know the story, right? But what can we learn from this part of the story? One thing that is evident, in the life of Moses is his sense of justice, right? Well, you might say that he was educated and raised by his own mother, right? He knew who his people are, right? He knew what side he belonged, right? But he had this sense of justice. But what was Moses trying to do here? What was he trying to accomplish here? Moses was trying to accomplish God's plan in his own way. No doubt that he knew that God can use him, even though, he was not officially called yet. But I'm pretty sure that he was educated by his own mom, that he knew that time will come, someone will deliver them, right? Maybe he was not thinking that it could be, himself, right? But what was he trying to do here? He was trying to accomplish God's plan in his own way. And Moses, after seeing, his people being beaten, what he did was what? He killed the Egyptian. So what is the lesson that we can get from this part of the story, my dear brothers and sisters? The lesson is, Moses knew about God's plan for his people, but he tried to put it on his own hands. One thing that I can tell you is, we all know that you and I were commissioned by God, right? And God has a purpose why you and I are here. God has placed you in a certain situation, in a certain location, because He wants you to accomplish His will for Him, right? But yet, one thing that we have to understand is that will be accomplished based on His ways, not our ways. And that is basically what Moses was trying to do. He saw one problem, and he tried to solve it on his own without consulting God. By what? By killing the Egyptian. What we have to learn, my dear brothers and sisters, is after knowing that God has commissioned us to do something, we have to learn to wait for God and wait for His leading. You have to remember, this work is not ours, though we are co-workers with God. But in order for us to be able to accomplish this work, we need to work with God. Because most of the times, we go ahead, right, with God's timing, because we're trying to do it on our own. The next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw the Hebrew men fighting. This time, his own people, not the Egyptians anymore, right? And he said, "Why are you beating up your friend?" Moses said to the one who had started the fight. The man replied, "Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" Then Moses was afraid, thinking everyone knows what I did. See, this is the consequence, folks, of putting it on your own hands. Yes, you have the right motive of accomplishing His purpose, but yet you're trying to do it on your own, right? You're trying to do it on your own. This is the consequence. What happened here? Sometimes we react what? We react violently. We react violently. And the result is, sometimes when we make all these bad decisions, we lose our own credibility from our own people. And this is basically what happened with what? With Moses. Yes, he had a passion to do it, but yet he went ahead of God, now waiting for God to direct him and lead his path. However, knowing our purpose and having a passion to do it is not enough. Moses had to unlearn many things from what he learned from Egypt and learn from God, as he will be ready for a bigger responsibility in front of him. That's why our key text that was read earlier is in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 to 6, right? It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path." My dear friends, yes, we want to be in control of our life. We want to see the outcome of it right away. But this, what this story is telling us is we need to be patient. We need to depend on God. And we need to wait on God. Just like Moses, we need to learn a lot of things from God. Then at the same time, we need to unlearn a lot of things from what we have learned from this world, in order for God to be able to what? Equip us with the things that are coming from Him. All right? To close my sermon, I'll be singing a song. And this is the summary of my sermon. I'll be projecting it there in front, so you'll be able to read the text or the lyrics of the song. And please pray while you're listening to the music that God will change our hearts and God will change our attitude. All things work for our good, though sometimes we can't see how they could. Struggles that break our hearts in two sometimes blind us to the truth. Our Father knows what's best for us. His ways are not our own. So when your pathway grows dim and you just can't see Him, remember you never God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when don't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart. His is the master plan. He holds the future in His hand. So don't live as those who have no hope. All our hope is found in Him. We see the present clearly, but His is the first and last. And like a tapestry, He's weaving you and me to someday be just like Him. God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when don't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart. He alone is faithful and true. He alone knows what is best for you. God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when don't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart. So when you don't understand, when you don't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart. The favorite part of this song that I have is the one that says, when you don't understand, when you don't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, what should we do? We need to trust His heart. My dear brothers and sisters, maybe you are in a situation where you can't see His hand. Maybe you are in a certain situation where you don't see His plan for your life. Maybe you just lost your loved one. And you said, Lord, why my son? You said, Lord, why my sister? She's too young. Why her? Why him? Why me? You have all these whys. And sometimes you're thinking, if God is really there, right? Maybe you're just diagnosed with a cancer. And you're asking this question, why me, Lord? I've been faithful to you all throughout my life. Why my family? Why this? Why that? My dear brothers and sisters, just like what the song says, when you can't see His plan, when God seems to be distant, from you, when you can't trace His hand, you have to trust God. Because one thing I can tell you, that you are special in God. And whatever He has started in your life, He will finish it in His time. God bless all of us today.